You need a home, and my little girl needs someone to call Mom, the man said. His breath, a pale cloud in the icy air, as he stood in front of the bus stop bench where Amara Johnson shook so hard her teeth clicked. She thought she had misheard him. Because no rich man in a dark wool coat and leather gloves talked like that to a black maid with a torn coat and no suitcase. Snow blew sideways down 7th Avenue, stinging her bare hands as she pulled her thin sleeves over her fingers and tried not to look up. "Sir, I'm fine," she whispered, even though her lips were blue and her toes were numb inside her wet shoes. "I'm just waiting for the next bus." The man glanced toward the empty street and then back at her, his gray eyes, tired but clear. "There's no more buses tonight," he said softly. "They shut the line an hour ago because of the storm." I checked. In the black SUV across the street, a little girl's face pressed to the window, her brown eyes wide and shining as she watched Amara with a look that felt like a hand on her heart. The child lifted a small mitten and waved once, careful, like she was afraid the woman on the bench might break. "Daddy?" the girl called through the small crack in the window, her voice thin but sure. "She looks cold, like Mommy did in my dream." The man flinched at the word, then walked closer and took off the navy scarf from around his own neck, the soft cashmere still warm from his skin, and gently wrapped it around Amara's shoulders without asking. "Please," he said, his voice now low and rough, "at least let me give you a ride somewhere safe. I can't just drive away and pretend I didn't see you." Amara almost pushed his hands away, because all day people had been pushing her, and she was sick of being the weak one. But the moment the scarf touched her neck, heat rushed across her skin so fast it almost hurt. Only 4 hours ago, she had been on her knees in a rich woman's kitchen on the Upper East Side, scrubbing the same marble floor again and again, while fever burned behind her eyes and her old boss shouted that the white spots were still there. She had told him she was sick and had begged for a break, but the answer had been a laugh and the words, "People like you are always lazy," ringing in her head, even now, as the wind tried to cut through her bones. When he had thrown the glass paperweight past her face and called her useless, she had picked up her empty bag and walked out with no coat, no money, and no last week's pay. Just the name of the street, her feet found out of habit from all the years riding buses to other people's houses. "I don't even know your name," she said, her voice shaking more from shame than from the cold, as she tried to give the scarf back and failed because her fingers would not obey. "Elliot," he said, glancing back at the SUV where the little girl was fogging the window with her breath. "Elliot Cole, and that's my daughter, Maya. She's 6 and 2, honest for her own good." He looked at Amara's red hands and added, more quietly, "She hasn't smiled at a stranger since her mom died, but she's smiling at you, so please, Miss Amara," she whispered, eyes dropping. "Amara Johnson." For a long second, the snow hissed on the sidewalk, and the stoplight clicked red to green to red again, and then Amara nodded once, very slow. "Just to the shelter on 14th, she said, giving in not because she trusted him, but because she was not sure she would live through this night. If she did not, the SUV's heat hit her like a soft punch when she climbed inside, and her vision blurred as her frozen fingers burned back to life. But she still noticed the way. The leather seats were spotless, and how the little girl had moved over to make space without being told. "Hi," Maya said, holding a worn brown teddy bear in one hand and tugging at her fuzzy hat with the other. "I like your scarf. It smells like Daddy's office and something pretty." Amara let out a weak laugh, then coughed so hard it bent her over, her chest on fire, as she tried to cover her mouth with her sleeve. Elliot checked her in the rearview mirror, his jaw tightening. "You're burning up," he said, turning the heat a little lower so she wouldn't faint. "We're going to the hospital first, then we can talk about shelters." Amara shook her head fast, panic rising as she thought of bills and forms and the way nurses sometimes looked at people like her. No hospitals, she rasped. I don't have insurance. And they don't want people like. Her words broke off as Maya reached up, small fingers touching Amara's sleeve. Please don't die, the girl whispered. Simple and honest in the way only a child could be. I already lost one mom. I can't lose you too, and you didn't even get to read me a story yet. The words hit Amara harder than the wind outside, because no one had ever said they needed her before, without also saying how little they would pay. She shut her eyes and leaned back, feeling the car move, hearing the soft sound of the wipers. Thinking of the last time she had been in a hospital years ago, when a nurse had asked for her blood to save a baby she never saw. By the time they pulled into the emergency entrance, she was shaking from more than fever. But Elliot was already out of the car, opening her door himself. You helped us by letting my daughter care, he said, as he slid his arm under hers to help her stand. Now, let me help you breathe. The night in the hospital moved both too fast and too slow. Lights bright and sharp against Amara's aching eyes as nurses wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm and pushed a thermometer under her tongue, while Elliot filled out paperwork at the front desk with the calm, firm tone of a man used to getting answers. When the doctor said the word pneumonia and talked about how one more night outside could have been the last straw, Amara stared at the ceiling and tried to swallow her fear, her hand pressing over the thin hospital blanket as if it were the only thing keeping her on the bed. She did not see the way Elliot's shoulders sagged when he heard the news, but she heard him ask, very quietly, if she could be kept overnight and how he would cover the cost, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had carried too many other things alone. Maya sat in the corner chair, coloring on the back of an extra copy of the intake form, drawing 3 stick figures, holding hands under a big square that might have been a house, her tongue between her teeth as she worked. Is she going to live? The little girl asked the nurse, not looking up from her picture. And when the nurse smiled and said, Yes, sweetheart, we caught it in time. Maya nodded, like she had expected that answer all along. Later, when the bike dripped and the room got quiet, Elliot came to Amara's bedside and spoke in a low, careful voice. I know you said shelter, he began, fingers curled around the rail like he needed something solid. But shelters are full this week. I checked before we came, and my house has empty rooms, and a very loud little girl who needs someone patient in her life. Amara's first response was no, because pride was the only thing she had never lost. Not even when landlords kicked her out, or bosses threw things at her. But then she looked at Maya, who had climbed into the chair by the bed and fallen asleep with her head near Amara's arm, as if her body already knew this woman's warmth. Just until you're better, Elliot added quickly, seeing the storm in Amara's eyes. A guest room, no strings, no debt, no charity speeches, I promise. She heard the strain on the last word and wondered what kind of rich man hated charity speeches, and for the first time thought maybe his loneliness was just as real as her hunger. Okay, she whispered, throat rough, but I'm not a broken thing you picked up by the road. I work, I help, I pay my way as soon as I can stand on my own 2 feet. A slow, honest smile touched his mouth for the first time that night. Deal, he said, and in the corner chair, Maya smiled in her sleep, as if she had heard every word. The house on the hill in Westchester looked like something from a movie. When they pulled up the next afternoon, snow piled on the wide stone steps and tall windows glowing gold from the inside. But when Amara stepped through the front door, she felt something else under the pretty, a deep quiet that did not feel like peace. There were no family photos on the walls, no school drawings on the fridge, no shoes left in the hallway, only clean lines and cold art that looked expensive but did not say who had loved it, and she said so without thinking. This place feels empty, she murmured, fingers curled in the borrowed sweater sleeve as she glanced around the wide living room. Elliot paused, his hand still on the keys, and there was a shadow in his eyes she had not seen before. It has been, he answered, for 2 years, since my wife Lena passed, and the way he said her name, soft and careful, made Amara wish she could pull the words back, just to wipe the hurt from his face. Maya ran ahead, her small footsteps echoing on the hardwood as she pointed out the kitchen, the big gray couch, and the stairs, then stopped and turned back. "Can she see my room?" the girl asked, almost bouncing, and Elliot nodded, watching as his daughter grabbed Amara's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Upstairs, the guest room was neat and warm, with a thick quilt on the bed and a small electric fireplace flickering under a white mantle. And on the nightstand, someone had already set a mug of cocoa and a folded note that read in careful handwriting, "Thank you for saying yes." Amara sat on the edge of the bed and let the heat soak into her sore body, her chest still heavy but breathing easier after the hospital medicine, and thought about every place she had ever slept that never felt like it was meant for her. She was not sure this room was meant for her either, but the quiet here did not feel sharp. It felt like a deep breath waiting to be taken. And when Maya peeked back in to ask if she would read a story later, Amara found herself nodding without fear. That night, after the book about a snow fox and hot baths and soft pajamas that actually fit, Amara sat for a moment watching Maya's steady breathing and felt something crack open in her chest that had nothing to do with sickness. Down the hall, Elliot stood half in shadow, watching her through the soft light with a look that mixed relief, fear, and something like hope, and when their eyes met, he whispered, "She hasn't let anyone but me tuck her in since the funeral," as if he still did not quite believe what had just happened. "Grief can't live where love keeps talking," Amara answered without planning the words, her voice low but steady, and they both turned toward the quiet room like they were listening to a new story starting. Days turned into weeks in a way Amara could not have imagined on that first frozen night, and soon the house did not feel so silent, because each morning brought the sound of Maya's feet thumping down the stairs, and the soft clink of mugs as Amara set out coffee for Elliot and cocoa for herself, writing silly notes on napkins just to see his serious face break when he read them. She did not mean to fall into a rhythm, but it happened anyway. School lunches packed with care, hair braided at the kitchen table, while Maya talked about math and playground drama. Laundry folded while a Motown song hummed from Amara's lips and echoed against the high ceiling like the house had been waiting for music. Elliot, who had once come home only to change suits and leave again, started arriving earlier, hanging his coat on the hook by the door instead of on the back of a chair, helping with dishes and burning grilled cheese, while pretending he meant to do it that way. At first, Amara told herself she was just earning her keep, working for a bed and meals until she could save enough to get back on her own. But the first time Maya clung to her leg and begged, "Please don't ever leave. You make the walls feel warm," she had to go to the bathroom and sit on the closed toilet seat until the tears stopped rising. One cold afternoon, after a checkup to be sure her lungs were healing, Amara sat alone in the hospital waiting room while Elliot took Maya to the vending machine, and she noticed a photo board on the wall with pictures of babies and thank you notes to donors. Her gaze stopped on one small picture of a pale newborn with a tiny knit cap and a name card that said Baby Girl Cole, and her heart hammered in her chest because she knew that last name and the date under it. 6 years ago, the same winter she had stepped into this same hospital, shaking from another long shift. Back then, a nurse had grabbed her arm and asked if she would be willing to give special cells from her blood and bone, what they called bone marrow, to help a baby whose match had not been found in time. And even though Amara had been scared, she had said yes because she could not stand the thought of some mother walking out of the hospital with empty arms. The doctor had told her the baby's rich father wanted to thank her, but she had asked them not to give her name, too shy and too proud to accept help from a stranger. And then life had moved on, heavy and hard. Now, as she stared at the photo of baby girl Cole, she noticed the tiny birthmark by the child's ear, a small dark crescent that looked exactly like the one by Maya's ear that Amara had kissed by accident last night when the girl had fallen asleep on her shoulder. Her breath left her body in a slow rush as the truth slid into place so neatly it scared her, the child she had helped save years ago. With her own body was the same little girl who now called from the hallway. "Amara, look, Daddy, let me get to snacks." The twist settled in her chest, like both a blessing and a weight, as they drove home. And for 2 days, she said nothing, walking through the house with a secret that made every small moment feel bigger, like she was walking inside a circle she had only seen from outside before. When she watched Maya draw 3 people under a big roof and label them me, Daddy, and Amra, with the missing letters squeezed in, she thought of that hospital bed years ago and the ache in her bones after the donation. How the nurse had squeezed her hand and said, "You may never see her, but you have changed her life." Now here she was, braiding that same child's hair, and it made Amara stand a little straighter, not as a guest or a worker, but as someone whose blood had already been tied to this family long before a snowstorm and a bench. She finally told Elliot one night, when they were alone at the kitchen table, after Maya had gone to bed, the dim light turning the wood surface into a warm island between them. "I saw something at the hospital," she began, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "A picture of a baby with your last name, from 6 years ago, and I think I was the donor they used when Maya was sick." At first he frowned, not quite catching up. Then his eyes widened as memory flooded in. The long nights in the pediatric unit, the desperate meeting with the doctor who had said there was a match but the donor wanted no contact, only to help. Elliot's hand shook as he set his mug down. The nurse said, "Our donor was a young black woman who came in after a cleaning shift," he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. "We prayed for her every night, even after Maya got better. I always wondered who she was and if she knew what she had done." Amara looked down, suddenly shy. "I didn't need thanks," she said softly. "I just hoped the baby would live." Silence wrapped around them, heavy but not cruel. And then Elliot pushed his chair back so fast it scraped the floor and came around the table, dropping to one knee beside her, like all his strength had run out. "You didn't just help us that night," he said, tears bright in his eyes now. "You saved my whole world, Amara, twice. Once when she was born, and again when you climbed into our car and let her heart open again." The twist did not change the way she made breakfast or folded clothes, but it changed something deeper. Elliot stopped talking about her as a guest and started saying our family when he spoke of the future. And Amara stopped seeing herself as someone crashing on kindness and began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was the home that had always been meant to find her. Good news moved slower than gossip in New York. And soon people around Elliot began to talk, not about the bone marrow story they did not know, but about the rich man who now showed up at small school, plays with a black woman at his side, and a little girl holding both their hands like they all belonged together. Some of his old friends called less, some business partners asked careful questions, and one sharp woman from his company's board pulled him aside after a meeting and said, in a voice that tried and failed to be kind, that rich men had to be careful who they brought into their lives, because the world watched. Elliot listened, then told her in a calm voice that he would not fire his heart to keep his image. And if the board wanted a man who led with fear, they could find someone else. At home, Amara heard pieces of these talks and felt a new kind of fear settle in her stomach, the fear of being the reason someone else paid a price. And late one night, after she thought both Maya and Elliot were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote a note. In simple words, she thanked them for the roof, the warmth, the laughter, and the love, and told them she would leave in the morning before sunrise, not because she did not love them, but because she refused to be the storm that broke their walls. What she did not know was that Maya, who often woke from light dreams and padded through the house with her bear, saw the note and carried it back upstairs, like a burning coal in her small hands. "Daddy," she whispered, shaking Elliot's shoulder until his eyes flew open. "She's leaving. It's my fault. I called her mom and I made everything messy. The look on Elliot's face when he read the note would have broken glass. He was out of bed and down the stairs in seconds, his bare feet cold on the wood, his voice rough as he called Amara's name and found her by the front door with her old bag and that same navy scarf folded under her arm. "You don't get to decide alone," he said, breathless. "This is my house, my choice, my family, and you are part of that, not some problem I have to hide." Amara's eyes shone with tears, but her jaw was firm. "I won't have Maya hurt because of me when kids on the playground repeat what their parents say," she answered. "I know how the world looks at women like me beside men like you. I've seen it too many times." Behind them, Maya stood on the stairs in her socks and pajamas, clutching her bear. "I don't care what they say," the little girl cried, her voice too big for her small body. "I just want my family, and that means you, Amara, because you're my mom, even if nobody likes it." The word mom, said awake this time, and not in a dream, hung between them like a bright light in the dim hallway, and it broke something open in Elliot that had been locked since Lena died. A locked room where love and guilt had sat side by side and kept him from moving forward. He turned to Amara, his eyes for once not hiding anything, and said, "I have been a coward, hiding you in this house like a secret, while telling myself I was protecting you, when really I was protecting my own comfort. And that ends now." Before she could answer, he pulled out his phone right there, standing in the hall in his bare feet, and called his company's head of public relations, waking the man and telling him to set up a press time for the next day, not to spin a story, but to tell the truth. Amara stared, half angry, half afraid. "You don't owe the world our life," she said, but he shook his head. "Maybe not," he replied, "but if I don't speak loud, where I have power, then the whispers win, and I am done letting fear choose my family." The next afternoon, Amara watched on the living room TV as Elliot stood behind a microphone in a dark suit, cameras flashing, and told the city that he loved a woman who once sat freezing on a bench, that she had saved his daughter's life twice, and that anyone who had a problem with that could take their money somewhere else. Reporters shouted questions, some kind, some sharp, but his voice did not shake as he said he would rather lose deals than lose the people who had finally taught him what home meant. When he got back, his hands still shaking from the rush, he found Amara in the kitchen with tears on her cheeks and Maya drawing 3 figures under a house again, this time with a bright sun and the word family printed across the top in red crayon. "You didn't have to do that," Amara said, wiping her face. "I know," Elliot answered, stepping closer, "but I needed to. For me, for you, for her, and for every person watching who has been told to hide the ones they love." It was then, with the weight of public eyes now, less scary than the thought of losing what they had, that Amara finally set her bag down for good. Time did not suddenly turn sweet and easy after that, but the hard things came with new strength to meet them, because now they faced trouble side by side, instead of in separate rooms. There were still looks at school functions, whispers at business dinners, and one sharp knock on the door from Elliot's late wife's old friend who tried to say, cutting things about maids and places and staying in one's lane. But this time, Amara did not stay silent. She stood in the foyer with Maya's small hand in hers and told the woman, in a clear voice, that love was not a job title, and that any house which tried to shame the person who dried a child's tears was a house already broken. The woman left in a huff, but Maya watched her go with a small smile, then turned to Amara and said, "Grandma Viv would like you. She likes people who say true things." And Amara laughed, even though her heart still raced. A week later, a letter came from Grace's mother, that same Grandma Viv, asking to meet the woman her granddaughter would not stop talking about. And one sunny Sunday they all sat in a small cafe, while the older woman, with sharp eyes and kind hands, studied Amara like a book she wanted to read slowly. "I will not lie," Viv said over her coffee. I was angry when I saw pictures before I knew you, because grief makes us hold on to old shapes. But then I saw my great-grandbaby smiling again, and I knew love was back in that house. And it was not my place to slam that door shut. Amara listened, her back straight, her palms damp, and when the woman reached across the table to squeeze her fingers and said, "Grace always wanted this home to be full, not frozen. So don't you dare let scared people send you away." Something inside Amara relaxed that had been tight her whole life. Soon, talk in the house turned not just to surviving gossip, but to building something that reached beyond their front door. As Elliot shared plans he had once buried in his grief plans, to reopen his late wife's small free clinic in the city, this time with Amara helping run it, using her years of quiet work and sharp eyes to make sure no one waiting in line ever felt invisible. The day they cut the ribbon on the Grace Cole Community Center, the sky over Harlem was bright and clear, the old brick building now painted fresh and welcoming with a new sign that read "For every neighbor who needs a second chance." And people from all over the block came out to see what the noise was about. Kids in puffy jackets chased one another near the steps, old men leaned on canes and nodded, and women in scrub tops from the nearby hospital smiled when they saw exam rooms with soft chairs and walls, the color of calm water instead of hospital gray. Amara stood by the door in a simple blue dress, greeting each person with the same gentle look she had once used to calm Maya's nightmares. And when someone called her Miss Director, she laughed, but she did not correct them, because for the first time, the word did not feel too big for her shoulders. Elliot gave a short speech, his voice less polished than before, but more honest, talking about Lena's dream, to build a place where no one had to choose between rent and medicine. And then he stepped aside for Amara. She took a breath, thought of all the nights she had cleaned other people's houses while her own life fell apart, and then spoke in simple words that carried down the street. "I know what it feels like to stand in the snow and think nobody sees you," she said. "But you are seen here, you are welcome here, and you are worth more than the worst thing that ever happened to you." The crowd clapped, some wiping their eyes, and from the front row, Maya jumped up and down, holding a handmade sign that said, "My mom helps people," in crooked letters. After the doors opened, after the first patients walked in, and the last crumbs from the cake were brushed off the sidewalk, they went home to their own small garden in the back of the house on the hill, where tulips and tomatoes now grew side by side, planted by 3 pairs of hands. That night, as they sat on the couch with Maya between them, her head on Amara's lap and her feet on Elliot's, the TV soft and the room full of the quiet that only comes when people feel safe, Amara thought of all the times she had been told she did not belong, in rich houses, in certain neighborhoods, even in hospital halls, and of how far she had walked from that frozen bench. Elliot reached over and laced his fingers through hers. Maya murmured in her sleep and hugged her bear tighter, and the house that had once felt like a museum finally felt like a place where stories were still being written. In that warm circle of light, with the storm far behind them and new storms sure to come, Amara knew at last that the home she had needed and the mother Maya had prayed for had grown from the same brave choice to love past fear, and that real family is built when people choose each other with open eyes and open hearts, not when the world tells them they are allowed.